Good evening, and thank you all for joining this little panel. Today is a busy day in the museum world, and there are several talks going on, including one which I will be on as part of the Piramal Museum of Art at 5 o'clock today. So I'm going to keep this little discussion as clear and precise as possible, and I'll try and finish up by about 4:40. And for those of you who have any questions, we can go ahead and ask them. So can I get the slides up, please? Thank you. So what I'm going to talk about is the history of the Indian art market in the 21st century. So this is a very particular focus on what is happening in the last 20 years. Just a little bit before that, from the mid-1990s till what is happening currently, and how to look at the art market purely in terms of its numbers and the way it functions, and how it has gotten to where it is today. So can I get the next slide, please? So this is pretty much the history of where things start. And it is tied in with what we call the dot-com boom, because most of the ability to create this international market for art, or to create a global market for Indian art, started with the dot-com boom. It's a very easy period of time to establish, and this was from about the mid 1990s, so from about 1995, but it also kind of exploded and collapsed. The bubble burst, particularly in September of 2000, when a bunch of internet stock companies crashed. From 1995, the value had gone up by about 600 to 800%, and then in September of 2000, that value dropped by 90%. Leaving huge carnage. But some of these brands that you see up here right now, things like eBay itself has disappeared. Netflix, of course, came in, and they also established that famous word we're using now called pivoting. People are, when on the internet you do something else or new, it's a pivot. So Netflix went from being a DVD distribution company to now what it is today. Amazon.com was a bookstore, and now it's a everything store. Lastminute.com subsequently got bought over by the backbone of their own operation. So Sabre is a travel agency company. They bought it. Monster.com, I'm not sure where it is right now. Google, as you all know, was around that same time. 1998 is when they established. Alibaba is from 1997. So as you can see, at this time, the internet had really picked up, and there was a lot of investment happening in the internet, which also gave rise to Indian companies like Infosys and HCL and Cognizant and TCS, and which are the mega companies. And all of this created vast amounts of wealth. It also created global connectivity. And what the IT industry did was also enable a lot of job opportunities in America for many Indians. Can I get the next slide, please? So with this establishing of a bubble or a market, what happened was, around this time, Sotheby's primarily, surprisingly, they were the leader in this field. And then, of course, Christie's followed very quickly, where they established for the first time a category in Indian art. So Christie's has been selling Indian goods since its founding in the 1700s. Like, everything that came off of ships from India is what Christie's started to auction, and that's how they established themselves. But in the 20th and 21st century, they had forgotten that India was their prime market, and they were dealing with modern, contemporary, post-war impressionist works in Europe. But somewhere around 1995, Sotheby's was consigned to sell the Chester and David R. Hurwitz collection. Now, Chester and David R. Hurwitz were a couple who were collecting, and they, I think, had well over 1,700 pieces of artwork, which they had decided that they would do some editing to, and what they edited came into the collection. into the auction, and the rest of it was donated to the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, which is why now one of the, I think, the most significant collections of Indian art exist over there, with an endowment and a way to support it, as I suppose proceeds from these auctions helped establish that. So what I've shown here is a small view of how there was Susan Bean had done an exhibition called Midnight to the Boom. And that was the first time that they brought, and that was in 2013, but that was the first time that they brought out a lot of their artwork that were in storage. And suddenly you realize that, wow, the choicest of Indian artworks are in this collection. So anyway, so Sotheby's created the category. And then since then, I mean, what I've quoted here on the right side of my slide is directly off of Sotheby's website. And then they talk about doing this over and over again, even as much as Amrita Javeri's collection, which again set a lot of large prices in the market, and they continue to do so. Christie's caught up. So if you look at Christie's, their most recent sale just before this COVID, which they've postponed, is the Keto and Jane collection, which again is a similar collection collected in depth by a couple, a non-Indian couple, and now they wish to sell parts of it. It's not very clear whether they want to set up a museum or what they want to do, but we know a part of their collection is being put up for sale to create some kind of corpus. So, but the key thing here is with auctions like this, and to figure out what is high quality artwork, what is collectible, they clearly establish that provenance is very important, right? The pedigree of an artwork, where it came from and whose collection it's coming from, creates value. So from here, can I get the next slide, please? So from here, I want to take you to a small little story. And it will help you understand why there is so much interest in Indian art from non-Indians, and why for Indian collectors or dealers and art market, the non-Indian market is very big. So everybody is, I mean, at least the people who I'm seeing here as attendees, and for most people who are involved in the Indian art world, have heard, confirmed, have heard of either Glenborough Museum, or they've heard of Masanori, and Masanori used to come to all the auctions and sit there, and in fact his whole family would come for all the auctions. So he visited India, which he claims again was because of his search of Buddhism. He came in the 70s and 80s, and eventually in the 90s he came in here and actually went on a mad buying spree. Not many people were aware of it at the time, unless you were in Delhi and Bombay. And in early 91, 92, I don't think anybody was even aware of what was happening in the art world. So he would come down and he would buy in bulk. He would buy 10 Tayyab Mehtas, 10 Padamsis, 10 Hussains, and he'd negotiate. He'd sit with people like Arun Vadera, who had just started in 1987. He would tell him, I want to buy 10 Tayyabs, I better get it lower than anything else. And imagine the price of a Tayyab in 1993, 94. I don't think they were anything. So he bought all of this. Also, a reason why I said a Japanese man came fishing is because I believe his wealth comes from a fish processing business that his father started, and I suppose it did very well. So eventually, Masanori then visited artists, he understood. He talks about his journey all the time, about how he's learned to appreciate artwork, how he has learned to look, how he's bought things he didn't like, and then how he edited his collection. But the good thing about Masanori now is we've learned the entire cycle, and which is very similar to most non-Indian collectors. The journey for Indian collectors seems to be different, but the journey for non-Indian collectors repeatedly is one of coming in at a time well before a market was established, starting to buy because they have inherent art knowledge and education from their cultural backgrounds. If you are in Japan, of course, it's a very modern society. If you're American, if you're European, you have the habit of going to museums, learning about art, and you have similar trends happening in your country. So these people come in, look at India as an area of huge opportunity, right? There isn't much value. I mean, think about it. If you took 1 year's worth of art sales in India in 2002, for example, which is around 540 crores, you can't even buy yourself a decent Picasso. It's less than $80 million. You can't. So so even today, I think they still believe that the Indian art market is undervalued. But Masanori came in, bought a lot of stuff, set up a museum. He became famous for that, kept buying a lot of artwork. And then end of last year, he did an exhibition at Pandol's where he exhibited the work. And then surprising, not so surprising, they established, I put down the cover of their sale that they had announced, which is now postponed, where Masanori is selling this. And surprisingly, while researching this and trying to get more images, dotcom doesn't exist. It's been pulled down as well. So think about it. It was a wonderful investment, and that's why I'm talking about Masanori in the market sense. He came in, looked at artwork that didn't have value, that didn't exist, pulled out a bunch of artists, not out of thin air, but definitely, working with Pandols, with Vadera, with the established galleries, looking only at people, obviously artists who were talking about, like people who are not, he was not looking at random artists, but he is credited to making people like Padamsi's market go up, Jogen Chaudhary's market go up, Shakti Burman's market go up. So he did that. When you buy in depth, that happens. But so he played a very interesting role of patron, and then an institution legacy builder, and then converted that whole thing into scaling up the value of his collection to now he probably will cash out. And if you give it, if you said 93 to now, we're talking about almost 30 years, he probably would be making far more money on this sale than if he had invested in the stock market. That's the trend of the art world. We'll get to that a little later in this talk. And if you guys have questions about how prices are calculated, or if you want to look at hardcore numbers, what is the CAGR, the CAGR on artwork, how is that calculated? I can talk about it a little later if you really want to look at how to invest in artwork without making too many mistakes. But so much like Masanori, you've had people, the Hurwitz, you've had many others. Almost every season in auction, you'll always find that this ambassador to India's collection is being sold, or that collector in Paris or France, or sitting in a lot of people from Switzerland, because interestingly here, if you guys are following me and I'm not going too fast, Bombay had a very large Swiss population in the 1940s and 50s. These were people who had come in exile from Europe, but they were running a lot of companies, a lot of mills, cotton industries, and they were the ones who were patronizing in art in Bombay. So they were collecting a lot of stuff which went back, and now that their children have inherited, a lot of that work has come into the market, which is why you find these estate sales still happening. So can I get the next slide, please? Right. So you can't talk about the founding of the Indian art market in the sense that it is today without talking about this one very remarkable. There are actually two people. I'll speak about the second one next. But Neville Tully, for everything that he's done, for all the good and bad problems that he's had, for the art funds that went bust, for I suppose it's been, it's in court, it's been taken everywhere. He kind of tried to run a Ponzi scheme to some extent, not intentionally. And he came in, and as early as 1997, he set up, which is what you're seeing this thing called Heart. Most of you familiar with Ocean's history would know that he started these Heart auctions, where he was the curator, he was the writer. And if you guys flip through, that's why I put some text on the left side, just below the image, about the kind of text he was writing in his auction catalogs. He literally had the job of educating the market on what high value was, on what art investment was. But the most remarkable thing about Neville Tully, and I have not found the answer to this, he refuses to answer it, and more unapproachable nowadays, but he came up with a list of 70 to 80 artists who till today are the only 70, 80 artists that this market is dealing with. How did he arrive at them? Why did he arrive at them? How did he find such a large net, that he cast and caught a lot of big fish, is still a mystery. It's not easy. It's not easy to say, okay, I just went and took 10 artists from Bombay, 10 artists from Calcutta, 10 artists from Madras. It doesn't work that way. He has done some research. He has done a lot of things prior to setting up his auction house, which has not been documented, and hopefully will be, the method will be documented at some point of time. But he creates this blueprint, and he creates this blueprint with somebody very interesting, who again we all know of, both love and hate very dearly in the art market for reasons best known to them. So you had Ashish Anand of Delhi Art Gallery, who also emerges at this time. Can I get the next slide, please? So it just makes it easier. So who also emerges at this time. And what is very interesting is when you research the artwork being sold at Oceans, or the artwork that subsequently is shown at Delhi Art Gallery, they pretty much borrow from the same holding of artwork, right? So please don't let your minds run away into conspiracy theories, or who did what and what is inflated. No, both these two guys came in with a lot of passion, and Ashish Anand came in with a business sense, and Neville Tully came in with heart, literally, with all the heart he could. Neville was a bad businessman, and Ashish has a phenomenal eye. What I was saying, so I know this is sounding like a pro Ashish Anand talk at the moment, but I will make it sound like pro many other people at some point. So, so he comes into the stock of artwork. They're buying heavily because the stories. Now, when you start to look at research the history of how Oceans was sourcing, it was always a visit to artist studios with Ashish Anand and Neville Tully, going in there and buying artwork. Now, a lot of people object to, oh, how can he buy the whole studio? How did they buy all of this? They bought it for nothing. But unfortunately, when you're talking market and business, that's the only strategy for long-term win in the art market, much like any other industry, right? People buy in bulk, you do commodities trading, you're allowed to hoard things, and then you're, if you can hold it long enough, and you can sell it, right? And the art market is arbitrary. I understand you shouldn't hoard rice and milk and pulses. That's wrong because you're inflating people's, just the basics. But art is the other end of, the more acceptable form of hoarding, because you're putting money into it, like stocks and shares and companies, right? So this is where it started. But interestingly, it's also the same time that I suppose a very young couple at that point, Dinesh and Minal Wazirani, came and set up Saffron Art. And Saffron Art was the first time that India, the dot-com boom got to the art market. So they started saffronart.com, which was an art gallery, online art sales room at the beginning. And then they quickly kind of removed that and now exist only as an auction house. But they have been, again, a very pure business play. If you see what they've done, irrespective of the prices going up or down, they maintain whatever the market level is, and they sell at whatever price. I think, and that's something very important to understand in the secondary market, is that you are only responsible for selling things at prices they're being offered to you. That's when a market finds its level. So if they are responsible for selling world record prices, they also have to be responsible for having very low purchase points as well. So when they do their no reserve auctions or absolute auctions, or most auction houses now do no reserve auctions, it's because you need to move artwork at the market levels, right? So anyway, so this is what happened. Then you have people like Christie's and Sotheby's and Bonham setting up offices in India, employing Indian sales forces, looking at the diaspora in America and Europe, looking at Indian buyers here. And by 2002 and 3, the market is really, really jumping, right? That's when you had use of 100 M.F. Hussain paintings for 100 crores, right? At the same time, just to give you an example, in 1999, when Saffron Art had their first sale, average painting of Hussain, which was 4 feet by 4 feet, for about $1.5 lakh. In 2001, when they had their next sale, a similar 4 feet by 4 feet painting sold for upwards of 15 lakhs. So that kind of a jump happened because the amount of wealth that was in India, the amount of wealth that existed in the world was very high at that point, right? So, and it continued to just compound itself all the way until 2008, when you had your Lehman Brothers crash and the US housing market but I'll again talk about that a little further. Can I get the next slide, please? So at this point, what are the galleries up to? So, and I think a lot of people are also looking at this in point, okay, why are we talking about auctions all the time? But we do because auctions are the only transparent market where numbers are published, where prices are visible. Of course, you can always say, what about shill bidding? You never know. It's like throwing acquisitions at the wind. So besides that, it's very transparent. Anybody can participate. If you've got the goods they want, you can sell it. Right? So galleries, now we would think that galleries are the foundation of this entire market, which a lot of them were. But what we have to understand is art galleries are the primary market, which means that making a name for an artist or creating that credibility, the interest, the collector base. So all the load lifting, right, is with the galleries to establish an artist. And then the auction markets will always come and scoop off the top. Of course, there are a lot of partnerships and deals and understanding between the two primary and secondary market. But if you look at what existed, I've just put on a small set of names. No, I'm not intentionally leaving anybody out, or the names here are not intentional. But just to give you a rough summary, you have Chemold, which was there from, as in Princess Street in Bombay as early as the 1940s, all the way to Pandos and Dumimal in Delhi. You have Badera, which set up, as I said, in 87. You have Kumar Gallery, who's been around for a while. Sakshi, where Geeta Mehra came from Madras, set it up in Bombay. And then you have, of course, Apparao Galleries in the south, who are long-term galleries from the 80s. All people who were in the art business before it was a viable business, before they got into it for the pure sake of creating revenue. So only Pandols from this list, in fact, and I may be wrong, is the only company that finally went on to leveraging their history, leveraging their customer base. And then all of you know what Pandols is today. It's a very powerful auction house which has consistently performed over 90% sale of their lots and have consistently broken records at every auction for the prices that they have got. I won't be talking about that particularly, but the galleries themselves were providing artists, pretty much contemporary artists, to these auctions, but they also could not directly give it because that would break down the system, right? You can't say, oh, I have a work of artist ABC, can you just put it up for auction? So they were helping the auction houses find works from their existing clients because it allows a client to then be able to cash in, and it gave a mechanism for galleries to kind of have some proof of what they spoke about to sell, right? Oh, this artist is a great artist, he's going to do well, you should buy him. In 10 years, he's going to be a big name. So if you have to validate those sales pitches, you then have to be able to prove a sale. So galleries ended up becoming consultants. So which is why Arun Vadera or even Dadiba Pandol were all consultants to Sotheby's and Christies, enabling them to source work and enabling them to be the conduit between the collector and the buyer with the auction house as the middleman. So can I get the next slide, please? So the question was, who was buying this artwork? Who is spending this kind of money? Who was breaking the first million? Who was, right? So as I said, NRIs are the first ones who brought in a lot of money because they were making a lot of money abroad. And in the early 2000s, art was also a way of repatriating funds. It was also a way of putting away a lot of money. We won't talk about does art enable you to put money into it in terms of getting away with things or illegal activities. I'm sure it does. It does so in a very large basis at one point, but the auction houses came in and cleared that because now it's all transparent. So you don't want to be doing anything shady with artwork when everything is out there and transparent. So the cleanup was very easily adopted. But the NRIs were able to buy art, collect art, put up artwork in their houses because they had money. Then you have the HNI investors in India. In India, the market is very different. It's people who say, okay, if I put so much money, how much will I get, right? And you did have a lot of people who had a lot of excess money because the country was doing well, business was doing well, stock markets were doing well, everything was on the up and up. But in India, it was driven by real estate, by healthcare, and the IT industry. So then I put down a little category called the lucky few, and I've mentioned a few names, not because of any particular reason, but people like Abhishek Podar or Dilli Vijayaraghavan is a very fairly unknown lady who's from Madras. Unless you're a collector of antiquities and traditional art, you won't know her. But her, Kiran Nadar, Lekha Podar, Ajay Piramal, they've all been people who started collecting and none of these people are connected to each other. None of them have any similarities. They're not from the same background. They're not from the same industry. They're all people who have an inherent sense of aesthetics. And so that's why they're a lucky few. It's not a formula. It's not a science that you can say, okay, this guy's going to be an art collector. That guy's going to be an art collector. It a lot of the times does not mean that collectors also have all the money in the world to throw at artwork. It's because they want to do it. It's because it's, for a lot of them, it's like a calling, you know, it's as spiritual or as religious for them to collect artwork. So these are the kind of people who kind of buy art, which create some kind of impact in the market. So can I get the next slide, please? Right. So now coming down to understanding what prices were being set, what kind of records were being made. Just put in a little snippet here from Arteray. Arteray is India's, I think, only art analytics company, where in 2020, this, I mean, talk up till March, right, with the infamous Nirav Modi sale, we broke 133 records for artists. We're talking 2020, which meant we went through the 2008 crash, we went through all of this. But what is interesting, and here I'm going to dwell a little bit to give you guys an idea of what's going to happen in this time of COVID. So in 2008, Lehman Brothers crashed. With it, dragged down everything, right? So it seemed like the world was going to recession, but for some reason, it affected America badly. It did not affect India and other companies as much. A lot of people made money. 2008 onwards, we've seen more record prices for Indian artwork than ever before. We've not seen record prices break even in 2003, 4, 5, and 6, which was supposed to be the boom period. But in 2008, 2009, you've had, like I put up a picture of the birth, that broke the world record. Saurashtra broke the world record. And I put down Tapovan, which was as recent as 2019, which is at $4.4 million, making it the most expensive work of Indian art being sold. So when India was, or the world was in recession, India was breaking record prices. It's the same period of time that more artwork was bought in India than ever before. 2008, 9, and 10, which is the recession period, it saw the contemporary market crash. And that's not because contemporary art is not good. It's purely because contemporary art in the 2002 to 5 or 7 period, I think, got overly inflated. People took the price up in comparison to the moderns. You know, when you're in a very small market, when you're in a very infant market, it's very easy to think that, oh, artist ABC, who's a contemporary artist, is very close to, you know, another artist who's a modern. The modern sells for 1 crore, the contemporary guy can sell for 50 lakhs. I think that's the mistake that was made, maybe due to a lack of foresight. Maybe the market was too young and we've not had 30 years to kind of inspect it and analyze it. It's continuing to be so. The contemporary market will continue to fall. It will continue to try and find its level. But just for the benefit of most people who are running galleries and who are trying to establish artists, the price for contemporary Indian art is only what your buyer is going to pay. That's the sad truth right now. And because contemporary artists are alive, there is no end to production. There is no telling where it will go. Prices don't go up when there is supply. Prices don't go up when there is access. Prices don't go up when there is complete visibility of what an artist is doing. And particularly today, every artist is on Instagram. It's very easy to reach them. You can go for studio visits. You meet them at art fairs. It's access is big, but you cannot find Hussein and Raza and Suza now, or Padamsi or anybody. So you're going to have to pay more and more to access their artwork, to own it, and to have some kind of interaction. So that said, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen at a point where galleries have lost sales, auction houses have postponed their sales, there's pretty much complete standstill in the Indian art market today. What are people going to do? It's a tough call. The immediate next year is going to be very tough. But that said, the economy is going to see again a lot of opportunity for people. So one sector is going to see job loss, another sector is going to have to pick up all of that work. Or one sector is going to make a lot more money from something. So people are going to come back within the next year and start investing again very heavily in art. So while people think it's going to be slow, I think there's going to be more money put into art in the next 6 months to next 24 months, because it has again proved itself to be one of the best forms of investment. So if you look at your stock market from March 24th till where it is today, it's dropped at 25% from your 42,000 high to your 32,000. That's where it dropped. There's no change in art prices, whether the auction houses are selling, or whether collectors want to sell, or whether gallery is selling. There's no reduction in price. So if you look at that performance, art is still very strong. And historically, if you look at the numbers, the average drop when your stock market drops by 30%, 20%, 30%, the art market does not drop more than anywhere between 2 to 3%. It's that low. And these are numbers. These are not me saying it. There are these numbers you guys can get from Art Tactics, or you can get it from Artery and several reports like that. So can I get the next slide, please? So here's I'm also keeping track of time, but I just want to talk about how in India, and this is a very special market. I'm sure most of you recognize these faces here. I've not captioned them, but these are the go-to names and ideally people who you wish would buy from you, or used to buy and you wish they would start buying again. So people like Abhishek Podar, nothing to do with Lekha and Anupam Podar. The Mr. Paul, whose picture I just put up there because he's one of those guys who's creating an institution. Everybody here in this picture has created an institution, by the way, which is why they're building a legacy, as opposed to a lot of the non-Indian collectors who, other than the Peabody Essex having a collection, most people have actually sold or put works out for sale. Very few, other than I think Roshan Sabawala, who sold his collection, that collection with Pandols, not many legacy sales or estate sales have come up in the Indian art market. So people like Kiran Nada, who I think contributes to well over 50% of keeping the world record prices where they are. The Piramals have a different way of collecting. They don't buy in auction, they buy privately. And I'm not talking about the private market at all here because there is no visibility to numbers, right? So one can only assume that whatever happens in the auction is paralleled in private sales, right? So the numbers would be similar, if not slightly higher, because of the premium for something that's not been seen publicly. Because a collector wants to own something that nobody else has seen and they reveal it to the world. So, or if you look at somebody like Abhishek Podar, he has come a long way. I kind of admire what he has done with his new museum, the Museum of Art and Photography, where he took his collection. First of all, again, very lucky few. He had a foresight when he was 15, 16 years old to go sit with Jamni Roy and every other artist in Bengal and build collections. I don't know if you guys are following his website, which they created called a bouquet or something. And he put up 25 paintings that he and his sister had commissioned 20 years ago for his parents. And, if you look at it, it has everybody from Bhupen Khakar to Manjit Bawa to Jogen Chowdhury, who all painted. He had that presence, he had that ability to look at art, collected stuff. We know that he sold a large part of his collection in Christie's about 4 years ago, but it was to build a museum, and he is building a museum. I have visited the construction site in Bangalore, and he's putting a lot of money back into the art so that it will help build the next generation. It will help uplift prices. Right. So same with everybody, same with the Piramals and the museum that they run. Kiran is building a new museum. Hopefully it kind of will be delayed, but not too far. People are building legacies, and it's these people that we need more of in the market. If you want a market to thrive and survive, you need more legacy collectors. You don't need people who are just buying and keeping things at their home, right? Or for building their own profile. So if you want to understand what the market is in the future, you need to understand what these legacy collectors are trying to collect and buy. So that said, it brings me to the end of this very rapid history, or rather the kind of journey that the Indian art market has taken in the last 30 years. So I'm going to throw this open now. If people have questions, and the questions can be answered from the Q&A box that you guys see, or if you want to put it down in the chat box, you can put it down there. But yes, that's the end of my presentation, and please go ahead and ask your questions. And if there are no questions, I can continue to talk a little bit more. If you guys want to ask me about any particular collector.
I have a question.
Yes.
I might, so I'm a complete rookie with the art world, so this was great to get a sort of a primer.
Sure.
I wanted to understand, when we talk about macroeconomics and the GDP of India and things like that, so one thing that I'm trying to build an understanding for myself is, how does the art world, and here I mean the arts and culture sector, how does it fit in and contribute or interact with? So can you tell us specifically with the Indian art world, and in this case your subject matter, how does it fit? Just what are those interaction points? How does it contribute or not at all?
Right. No, I think what we don't look at is, when you have a market like this, when you have an economy based around certain objects and their trade, you realize that it also provides jobs, right? It's every single person who's setting up a foundation or a museum, right? I've been very specific about the visual arts and modern and contemporary Indian art, but there are many museums in India that are private, which are for folk art, tribal, music, dance, right? And they are the ones who are actually putting the money in to build institutions that are hiring people who have gotten themselves trained in these fields, right? Arts managers like you and I, we go get educated saying we love it, but when you come back here, you need a job. So it's coming from the private sector. The government sector has no jobs for people who are arts managers. There's very few, right? If you get employed by a progressive government museum, it's very few, right? So I think it's very important. The market does support a very vast number of people. And particularly now that vast number of people are very vulnerable if there isn't money coming into the sector, right? You can't put the burden on somebody saying, I buy the artwork and I have to provide jobs and I have to, keep the sector alive, right? So we need people to come in. But yeah, that's the major contribution from the market to the infrastructure side. Yep.
Thank you.
Super.
Opening up the floor again to any one of the attendees. If anyone would like to talk instead of type a question, that is also possible. But Ashvin, in the Q&A box, we have a question from Indrajit.
From Mr. Indrajit. Super. So the question is, yes, so the collector Lily Vijayaraghavan, who is from Madras, who I call an aesthete. And a lot of people I also mention as aesthetes because they have an eye. And starting with Ashish Anand, who has a phenomenal eye. Whatever said and done, when you look back at the works that he has or offers, the quality is phenomenal. whether what works Kiran Nadar buys. I mean, if you look at the wall presence and the visual impact of the work she buys, there is an eye. She has the eye to see. So Lily Vijayaraghavan also has the eye, and she used to, she continues to buy some of the best antiquities there is. I have never seen a collector with works of that quality. I've not seen museums sometimes with works of that quality. So it is a neglected space. Just to give you again a market perspective, when Bowrings came into India in 2001, they set up their first sale and they ended up selling works that were older than 100 years, which is why they shut down. In 2003, they had FIRs filed. I think 2012 was when the Supreme Court also said it's their headache to figure it out with the ASI. But yes, they have done something illegal. But if you come to the problems of the law, I think that's where a lot of the answers are. The government has to be more proactive about dealing with antiquities. See, Saffron sells antiquities, they're registered. Astha Guru sells antiquities, Pandols does. But the problem that they don't keep having more sales is because I think it takes 6 months to a year to even just register it and hand it over back to the client. And I think it's not worth taking that effort to do so. But I'm just going to continue reading your question. More collectors overseas, yes, because there are no laws overseas. You can buy, if you live in, depending on which country you live in. America has no rules on antiquities. The UK has no rules on antiquities. So conduits, Switzerland, absolutely no rules. They have free ports where you can just keep antiquities from anywhere in the world without any question. So I think that's the difference there. We're not ignoring our own history. I think we're being made to. Our laws are very, very archaic, but I think there is effort being made. I know there was at Piramal, we did a conference recently last year about the antiquities law. So there is debate and discussion on it, but it's something that the government only can help, and only if they do, the market will open up. So hope that answered your question to some extent. I'm looking at another question, which is there. How do you think digital exhibitions and increased access to art change the world? Okay, so in the other panels which I've been talking on or listening to, I've been fairly vocal that digital is not an alternative. But for the purpose of this talk, and I assume somebody would ask this, I've been speaking to galleries who participate in Frieze or in Art Basel or all these things which have gone, or Art Dubai went online. And they have a very interesting point. So if you qualify to be part of the art fair network anyway, like if they said, yes, sure, you can come, but they're not taking your money because they've canceled the fair, they gave you free access to their network of VIPs who would come, they put you on their website. Surprisingly, they have had sales. Surprisingly, it's worked well enough as a marketing exercise where people have come, looked at the artwork, and it gives the galleries a chance to still be connected to their buyer base, so on and so forth. So there, the digital space does come in, but it doesn't replace your tactile experience. It doesn't give you the same, edge over coming and seeing a piece of artwork. So I think a lot of galleries going digital are doing it just to stay connected with your community, with your collectors, buyers, and visitors. But I'm not very sure, because end of the day, remember, most deals nowadays are done on WhatsApp. People just send pictures. Okay, sure. How much? 4 crores? No, 3 crores. Okay, sold. So that's how it's happening. So yeah, I think it's predominantly a method to market oneself. And I have an anonymous attendee asking, so is it a panic situation for the art market, or do you see holding? The buyer says it's a panic situation because it's market slow, might as well give it a shot and see if somebody will give you a discount. Yes, there are people in distress already. If you have some other business, you need to pay 1 crore of salaries next month and you don't have revenue, you probably would sell a expensive work of art to quickly liquidate, and the premium for the money is the discount to the buyer. So that would happen. But if you have, it's a simple rule. If you have the ability to hold, and if you have high quality, if you have the best Hussain, the best Raza, the best any of these proved artists, hold. The longer you can hold, the more money you'll get for it. It's guaranteed. So that would be my advice.
Okay, great. I think you've covered all of the questions. Ashvin, thank you so much for that. And to all of our attendees, thank you again for joining us. We appreciate your staying for the whole session, and happy International Museums Day to you. We have one last session which is being hosted by the Piramal group actually, and Ashvin, I believe you're going to be on that as well at
Yeah,
5.
you can see my face another 5 minutes on a different Zoom call.
Wonderful.
All
right.
I could just change my shirt maybe and it'll look different, but no, I'll be there. It's going to be an interesting panel with people who run very interesting museums. So you have Deborah Tyagarajan, who runs Dakshin Chitra. You have people from the Partition Museum. You have a whole bunch of the Indian music experience. It should be fun. And it's going to be more free-flowing talk about the current situation. So do join if you guys can. The link should be there on the chat, which you guys can look at. But thank you once again. Thank you all. And yes, I hope this is being recorded. And somebody asked, yes, it is being recorded. It will be shared, hopefully. So, thank you all. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Thank you.